Soon after the beginning of August 2000, news spread about a malfunctioning submarine that had been stuck in the Barents Sea. Divers eventually gained access to the ship and discovered a very unpleasant situation despite the rapid organization of many rescue operations. Viewers should use caution, as always. There was anticipation that August 12, 2000 would go down in Russian military history as a watershed day. With an ambitious show that would capture the attention of the whole world, the country's navy was ready to perform its first major military exercise since the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Operational preparedness, strategy testing, and personnel preparation for the stresses and intricacies of war are all goals of military exercises, which are effectively combat simulations employing real-world circumstances and fake targets. This was meant to be a signal that Russia has restored its position as possessing one of the world's top fleets, especially with the emergence of the newly elected Russian president. Not only did 30 warships take part in the drill, but a submarine with an almost legendary renown served as its focal point. The Kursk, with its state-of-the-art technology and superior weaponry, was one of the biggest nuclear-powered attack submarines ever constructed, measuring 505 feet, 154 meters, in length, and 60 feet, 18 meters, in width. Additionally, the Kursk was among the world's biggest submarines, second only to Russia's Typhoon-class ballistic missile submarines, with a water displacement of around 2,400 tons while submerged. A member of the Oscar II-class submarines, the Kursk was built during the Cold War in reaction to the increasing might of Western naval forces. Not only were submarines of this class constructed to be fearsome weapons of war, but they were also showcases of technical and engineering brilliance. Typical of Soviet-era submarine design, the Kursk had a double-hull design that increased the ship's and crew's chances of survival. The outer hull was constructed with 8mm thick steel plates and strengthened with 80mm of rubber covering to reduce acoustic detection by opposing ships. Protecting the submarine's vital systems and crew, the inner hull was 50mm thick. Additionally, there was a space between the two hulls that might possibly prevent underwater explosions, giving the submarine the ability to survive torpedo strikes that would destroy weaker ships. Beyond that, on the interior of the Kursk, there were 9 watertight compartments that were each covered with massive hatches. Their purpose was to maximize the chances of survival for the remaining portions of the ship by restricting flooding or damage to specified areas. In addition to being able to elude enemy radar more successfully, its 7-bladed propeller arrangement made it quieter than prior Soviet versions. Its maximum dive depth was approximately 2,000 feet, or 600 meters. From a defensive perspective, the Kursk was obviously a highly sophisticated submarine, but it was as frightening while attacking. It could transport conventional or nuclear weapons via its 550-kilometer range cruise missiles. Along with cruise missiles, it carried a variety of torpedoes, one of which was the very large and powerful Type 65-76A, which needed extreme caution due to its fuel of flammable hydrogen peroxide. Again, the submarine was built to take on and neutralize Western aircraft carriers. Therefore, these missiles were a major component in the design of the sub. These enemy ships are crucial, and only one of these torpedoes might destroy them. But above all else, the Kursk was a representation of our nation's pride. Its 1995 commissioning marked the zenith of Russian naval engineering at a time when Russia's defenses were still reeling from the fall of the Soviet Union. Military leaders and news outlets often said that it was unsinkable due to its unparalleled resilience. The legendary position of the submarine was further solidified by its crew, which was generally considered to be the greatest in the Russian Northern Fleet, and the design of the sub itself further contributed to this image. The military drill in August 2000 became an unfathomable catastrophe because these many sources of pride and imagined invincibility obscured some recognized concerns. According to reports, the Kursk was docked at Vidyayevo on the Kola Peninsula on August 10th, with 111 crew members, 5 Navy commanders, and 2 civilian engineers. The submarine continued its journey towards the Barents Sea, the designated location for the drill. After 2 days, the military drill began bright and early, and at 8:51 in the morning, the Kursk asked for and secured permission to fire torpedoes for practice. Its intended victim was a battlecruiser, a very competent vessel in the Russian Navy. The next step was for the crew to fire mock torpedoes, which were devoid of any explosive warhead, in order to improve their skills. The submarine was prepared to launch 2 practice torpedoes at 11:29 a.m. after an undisclosed delay. 30 seconds later, a little tremor, around the same as a 1.5 on the Richter scale, was detected by seismic detectors spread out over northern Europe. Having said that, it wasn't an earthquake. On the contrary, it was definitely an explosion. A second, much bigger explosion, around 2 or 3 tons of TNT, tore through the submarine at 11:32. The forward sections and the hull of the Kursk were destroyed in this explosion. The incident, 250 times stronger than the first explosion, was observed by seismic detectors as far away as Alaska. The Kursk sank to a depth of 354 feet, 108 meters, shortly after, to the east of the Rybachi Peninsula, in the ocean. Involved Russian ships were also jolted by the second explosion. Another submarine, the Karelia, also felt the tremor as the shockwave ripped through the water, but its skipper thought it was all part of the drill. The battlecruiser's crew reported feeling the same rumble, and a hydroacoustic signal matching that of an undersea explosion was picked up by the control room. Admiral Vyacheslav Popov, commander of the fleet, remained unconvinced despite several unsuccessful attempts to reach the Kursk. He put it down to a technological glitch and said the Kursk couldn't be reached. Next, that afternoon at 1:30, the Kursk was to fire the practice torpedoes, as per the permission it had obtained. Admiral Popov was unfazed when that period passed with no communication from the submarine, evidently assuming that the Kursk was still functioning. However, the command staff of the fleet started to become more worried by the late afternoon. After a helicopter was deployed to look for the Kursk on land, it failed to turn up any signs, so other planes were flown into the Barents Sea to help scour the area. But no matter how hard they tried, the search came up empty. Officials from the Northern Fleet started to admit the gravity of the situation around 6 o'clock in the afternoon, when the Kursk still hadn't responded to their ever-increasingly urgent communications. Following this, Admiral Popov issued a more extensive search and rescue order, deploying ships and planes to explore the ocean. Still, he kept his cool under pressure. However, this would soon alter when the broader search again yielded no results. At around 10:30 that night, he finally stopped the workout due to an emergency. The extent of the catastrophe became apparent to the Russian Navy 11 hours after the first explosion. This is because, that night, authorities made no statement on the Kursk's whereabouts. Despite being aware that the Kursk was lost and contact with it had not been established, Admiral Popov informed the media that the exercise was a success overall. Back at home base, relatives of the submariners started hearing reports that the drill had gone horribly wrong. Information about the ship's whereabouts and the health of its passengers was scarce, but word quickly circulated across the little outpost. Because of this lack of communication, anxious relatives had to rely on the Kursk's unsinkability reputation. With a deep submergence rescue vehicle, DSRV, on board, the Russian rescue ship Rudnitsky reached the training area's fringes early in the morning on August 13th. Rescue operations are complex and risky, as you may have seen in earlier movies on submarine tragedies. These vehicles have a unique hatch at the base and resemble miniature submarines. In order to produce a watertight seal, this hatch must be precisely aligned with the hatch of a decommissioned submarine. Once this is done, the survivors may be escorted into the rescue vehicle by either hatch. The Russian Navy, however, would need to find the Kursk before they could do this. 2 peculiar forms on the ocean floor were seen by a Russian Navy ship at around 4:50 in the morning. As a result, there was renewed optimism that the sub had been located. When the Rudnitsky lowered its anchor in the location thought to be the scene of the event around 9 in the morning that day, an eerie noise resounded throughout the ocean. Everyone thought the submarine was sending out distress signals, but it turned out to be just the anchor chain rubbing against the ship. In the midst of the AS-34 DSRV preparations, the Rudnitsky's control crew kept an eye out for radio signals that may have originated from the Kursk, but they never arrived. The AS-34 didn't sink into the Barents Sea until well after 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The car quickly collided with an item once it hit the ocean below. The submarine's propeller and stern stabilizer were visible to the crew via the aperture as the sub went down. The Kursk was located by them, but the AS-34 was injured in the crash and had to conduct an emergency climb, so it couldn't start connecting to the Kursk. There was a delay of many hours before the AS-32, another DSRV, could be sent out. Even then, it had trouble locating the Kursk since the command ship had given it the wrong direction. Thus, it was compelled to emerge after combing the seabed without ever having made visual contact. A salvage tugboat that had deep-sea cameras on board arrived at the location to help clarify the Kursk's condition. The reality they discovered, however, was alarming. From the bow to the sail, the camera shots showed devastating damage to the submarine. The Kursk was partly submerged in the ocean floor as it listed at a 25-degree angle, its bow lowered by around 5 to 7 degrees. The submarine was probably not more than 66 feet, 20 meters deep when the accident happened, but the fact that its periscope was still up is a strange omen in and of itself. After the AS-34 was repaired aboard the Rudnitsky, the DSRV was dispatched out into the ocean and found the submarine within an hour of being launched, even though completely charging the batteries took 13 to 14 hours. Without delay, it started trying, in vain, to secure the DSRV hatch onto the escape trunk above the 9th compartment. The DSRV was unable to establish the necessary vacuum seal for a secure connection. Worse still, the team had to come to the surface and stop trying because the batteries were dying so quickly. Worse still, the rescue operations were hindered by the weather, which intensified the gusts and caused the seas to become very hazardous. After suffering many logistical setbacks, the Russian Navy was compelled to temporarily halt the rescue operation. The Russian people, worried about the exercise's real result due to the proliferation of rumors, were also compelled to face Russian leaders at the same time. The Russian media were informed on August 14th that the submarine had experienced some minor mechanical issues 2 days before. The military was aware that none of the public-facing claims, that the Kursk could have been found, that everyone on board was alive and well, or that air and electricity were being supplied to the submarine from above ground, were genuine. Norway, the UK, and the US were among the nations that stepped forward after the announcement to offer help to the rescue operation. However, Russia first turned down all outside aid. After additional failed efforts to connect the DSRV over the course of many days, Russia soon recognized it couldn't salvage the situation. All in all, they tried 14 times without success to secure the 9th compartment hatch with the proper seal. It was at that moment that the president finally acknowledged the need for international assistance and requested that Norway provide a rescue diving team to the site. The Norwegian vice admiral leading the expedition almost canceled the operation due to misinformation and plain falsehoods supplied to him by authorities, which rapidly indicated that the partnership was in peril. The vice admiral believed that these falsehoods would endanger Norwegian divers needlessly. Nonetheless, the problems were resolved and the rescue operation commenced. Norwegian divers were able to open the door to the Kursk's 9th compartment in just 1 day of their deployment, but what they saw within was total disaster and destruction. At the moment of the catastrophe, every single person on board the Kursk perished. Russian and Norwegian divers recovered the remains of many people from the Kursk submarine on later dives, including Lieutenant Dmitry Kolesnikov. As they examined the corpse of the 27-year-old, who was the officer in command of the turbine room, the salvage crew uncovered a devastating find. Dmitry had written a message after the explosion and stashed it in one of his pockets. According to his account, 23 men made it through the twin blasts and took refuge in the ship's rear compartments, where they waited for rescue in total darkness. This explained why his handwriting in the message was so sloppy. According to the official investigation into the tragedy, the survivors probably succumbed to carbon monoxide poisoning within 8 hours of the blast. This means that the Russians could not have taken any action to save their fellow soldiers within that period. On the other hand, some viewed this with skepticism. Rather, it is believed that Russian Navy officers secretly believed that the troops in the rear compartments probably endured a 3-day slow and excruciating death. Contrarily, claims suggesting a cover-up about the incident's bad management have persisted over the years, and the official report virtually exonerates the Russians from any misconduct in the rescue operation. There will probably never be complete clarity about what transpired on the Kursk. It is believed that the test torpedoes are to blame for the explosions that brought the submarine to the bottom of the Barents Sea, but Dmitry's farewell message did not specify a reason. In order to carry the much bigger Type 65 to 76A torpedoes, each Oscar II class submarine featured 4 regular 533mm tubes, in addition to 2 extra-large 650mm tubes. The official investigation found that while the crew was getting ready to launch one torpedo, it either had a defective weld or sustained damage. Once again, the torpedo's explosive hydrogen peroxide fuel makes them very delicate to handle. It is not yet known what the fuel may have come into touch with, but it is believed that the first, smaller explosion started a fire, which in turn ignited the remaining gasoline in their torpedo, triggering a second, far bigger explosion. Despite being perhaps the most honest portion of the report, the official conclusions of the investigation into what precisely transpired have been doubted in the years after the Kursk's sinking. Meanwhile, official state media have proposed the idea that a U.S. Navy submarine was involved in the Kursk disaster. Even though he has never provided proof, the admiral has said on record that a collision with a NATO submarine was the cause of the tragedy. The United States denied responsibility for the Kursk tragedy, but it did admit to having submarines in the area at the time. The actual details of the Kursk disaster are still up for debate, but everyone can agree that it was a horrible tragedy for the people on board.